To understand how I ended up in this airport with 2 suitcases and a ticket to a place I've never been, I need to take you back exactly 6 hours to a private dining room at a country club in Boca Raton, Florida. The air smelled like roasted prime rib and the heavy floral scent of my mother's designer perfume. I sat at the far end of a long mahogany table, smoothing the fabric of my clearance rack dress against my legs. It was supposed to be my graduation dinner. Earlier that afternoon, I walked across the stage to receive my degree in finance. I paid for that piece of paper myself, balancing full-time course loads with 50-hour weeks, carrying trays of hot wings and cheap beer at a local sports bar. My mother, Beatrice, sat at the head of the table. She adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet and signaled a waiter for a fresh glass of champagne without glancing in my direction. Next to her was my sister Brittany, scrolling through her phone, her manicured nails tapping against the screen. Brittany drove a brand new Range Rover and spent her days scheduling Pilates classes. Across from her sat her husband Chad, wearing a tailored suit, laughing too loudly with my stepfather Richard. They were the golden circle. I was just the charity case they kept around. I kept my left hand hidden inside my jacket pocket, my thumb tracing the rough, scratched edges of a cheap plastic compass. It was the size of a quarter. My biological father mailed it to me when I was a toddler, right before my mother said he abandoned us to live in a trailer park in the Pacific Northwest. I kept it because it was the only thing I owned that my mother did not buy, and therefore could not hold over my head. Chad leaned across the table, swirling his bourbon. He flashed a brilliant, empty smile. "So, Aubrey, ready to fetch coffee for the Wall Street dropouts? I hear the entry-level jobs pay just enough to cover rent if you skip dinner." Brittany laughed without looking up from her phone. "Leave her alone, Chad. She's going to be a very successful bank teller." I pressed my thumb harder into the plastic compass in my pocket. I forced my mouth into a polite, neutral curve. "I am aiming for corporate acquisitions, actually," I said, keeping my voice steady. Richard snorted, slicing into his steak. "Acquisitions? You need capital for that, Aubrey. Real capital, not tip money from a diner." I did not argue. Arguing with them was like screaming at a brick wall. I just looked down at my plate, waiting for the evening to end so I could go back to my tiny rented room and sleep. Then my mother picked up her heavy silver spoon. She tapped it gently against the rim of her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, clear ringing sound cut through the low chatter of the country club. The table fell silent. Beatrice offered a bright, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thin, unmarked white envelope. She held it up so the surrounding tables could see what a generous, loving mother she was. "We have a special surprise for our graduate tonight," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Since you are so driven and so incredibly independent, we figured it was time you truly spread your wings." She slid the envelope across the polished wood. It stopped right next to my plate. My mother kept her hands submerged inside her pristine leather handbag for what felt like an eternity. The gold clasp had snapped open with a sharp click, echoing over the low hum of country club chatter. But she dragged out the moment, letting the suspense hang heavy in the air. I watched her crimson fingernails brush against the silk lining. My pulse thudded in the hollow of my throat. Every time Beatrice dragged out a silence, it meant she was setting a stage. As I sat there, gripping the edge of the mahogany table, my chest tightened with a familiar, suffocating anxiety. Watching her dig for my supposed graduation gift brought a bitter taste to the back of my mouth. It took me right back to a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 4 weeks ago, standing on the thick Persian rug of my stepfather's home office, begging for my future. I had been one signature away from not graduating at all. The university bursar placed a sudden hold on my account for a remaining balance of $2,000. It was a minor administrative fee pileup, but without it cleared, they would not release my diploma or let me walk across the stage. I did not ask Beatrice and Richard for cash. I only asked for a simple co-signature on a short-term student loan extension. I already had the paperwork printed, the pen capped and ready in my trembling hand. They did not even look at the documents. Richard sat behind his heavy oak desk, swirling a glass of scotch, while my mother stood by the window inspecting a minor blemish on a potted orchid. Richard told me, in a tone usually reserved for dismissing a valet, that his credit was currently locked up. He claimed they needed every ounce of liquid leverage to back Chad on a new commercial real estate acquisition down in Miami. I remembered standing there, my cheap sneakers sinking into their expensive rug, feeling a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. I knew exactly what acquisition Richard was talking about, because I was the one who balanced the books for it. For 3 years, I acted as the family's unpaid bookkeeper. I spent my weekends hunched over a laptop at my kitchen table, organizing their chaotic ledgers, tracking their expenditures, and catching costly errors that their high-priced accountants routinely missed. I never signed any official tax documents, carefully protecting myself from legal liability, but I saw every single cent that flowed through their hands. I knew Chad's Miami project was a ticking time bomb. Chad had walked into the home office right as Richard denied my loan. He wore a pastel polo shirt, looking sunburnt and smug, fresh off the golf course. Before I could stop myself, the frustration boiled over. I turned to Chad and told him the truth. I warned him that the mezzanine loan he was using to bridge the gap on the Miami property was predatory. I had read the fine print. I recited the terms from memory, pointing out the aggressive interest rate escalators and the ruthless default clauses that would trigger a total asset seizure if he missed a single development milestone. I handed him the financial reality on a silver platter, trying to save the family from their own reckless greed. Chad did not thank me. He let out a loud, grating laugh, shaking his head as if I were a child pretending to play business. He looked down his nose at me and called me a textbook amateur. He told me that state school finance majors did not understand how real-world leverage worked, and that I should stick to fetching coffee and balancing checkbooks. Richard smiled in agreement. My mother finally turned away from her orchid, offering a thin sigh of annoyance, and told me to figure out my little school problem on my own. I left the office that day with my unsigned paperwork and a burning knot in my stomach. To cover that $2,000 gap, I picked up every discarded shift at the sports bar. I worked until 2 o'clock in the morning, smelling like stale fry grease and spilled beer, then went home to study for my final exams until the sun came up. I slept 3 hours a night for a month. I ran my body into the ground, surviving on cheap coffee and sheer willpower, just so I could earn the right to wear a cap and gown today.